Heidi, hi. So I've always thought of character as being the glory element of literature, but today I'm going to talk to you about setting and why actually setting is the boss. Right, so why is setting the boss, the shiny thing, the best element of literature rather than characters who we all love to pick to bits, right? Setting is the boss because setting influences characters, and characters through their actions and reactions influence events, right? So actually everything is driven by setting. Now, that is even more obvious if you look at 4 types of setting. I like to look at these 4 types anyway. With the juniors, I'll look at the first one, physical setting, and that's of course your time and your place. As students get older, I delve into the other settings. So the second one would be your political setting. Of course, especially when we're doing dystopian text, we love to look at the political setting with seniors. Cultural setting is a third one, fabulous. And the fourth one is social setting. So those little behaviors, what's cool, what's not in this little group of people. So 4 types of setting, and they drive everything. Before we go into each of those settings, I want to point out something that I noticed the other day, and it's about the lifespan of settings. Well, I call it a lifespan. Just a little bit of interest here. So your physical setting, the time and the place, time is constant, goes with the seasons, the phases of the moon, the day and the night, and place never changes unless there's a volcanic eruption, a flash flood or whatever. It only changes if people get involved. But let's look at it as a constant. Physical setting is a constant. Political setting, of course, can change very quickly. And when it does change, it is a momentous event. It doesn't change often, but when it does, it's huge. Cultural setting. Now, culture, you can't change a culture. Cultural setting is constant, and it is the backbone of those characters, and something that we probably don't look at enough. So bear that in mind. Social setting. Social settings change constantly, and they are at the mercy of trends, right? So lots of little changes all the time. I just thought it was an interesting kind of way of looking at the different types of setting. So that's a little aside. Okay, so let's talk about physical setting. So physical setting, your time and your place. Now, how do students describe the setting? As mentioned, this is about your natural elements, so your seasons, your day, your night, your phases of the moon. So that's one way of describing the time. But you could also describe the time as in terms of eras. It was the industrial age. It was the times of depression between World War I and II. And so on. You can use the Gregorian calendar, of course, so it was June 2024. Students can also describe setting through the mood, so it was an inspiring place, it was a romantic place, it was a dismal place. That's one way to do it. And the other way is to get them thinking about, well, what are the senses experiencing? So what do they see, which we've discussed, but also what do you feel to the touch, so it's cold. What do they smell? Even taste, and certainly what do they hear. So that's that description of that natural physical place. The other way to do it is to think about figurative language. So it was a gangrenous place, so that's a little opportunity to slip in some figurative language techniques there as well. So I would recommend giving students a lot of words, perhaps phrases, to help get them started in ways to describe the setting, the physical setting. And students can always add to that, and they can make up their own figurative ideas as well. So from the physical setting and describing it, you can move into how that setting affects characters. So what challenges are there for those characters in that physical setting? How does it force characters to develop? So they've got to adapt to those challenges, right? Gain new skills, new knowledge, find new tools. So that's part of that development. And they've also you've also got to think about, well, maybe that setting encourages the characters to flourish. So maybe it's a good setting, because I know we focus a lot on the negative side of things, but also maybe there are good aspects of that setting. And for Kiwi teachers, this is where you can tap into to what extent that that place, or anyone really, that place nourishes the person. It's that idea of that tūranga waiwai, that sense of belonging. So that's really brilliant there. Okay, let's talk about political setting. So this is quite complex for students, because nobody understands politics really, and there's a lot of big words involved. So what I would suggest is you really focus on 4 types of government. So there's the autocracy, where you have one absolute ruler. There's the oligarchy. So can you tell I'm looking at my notes, because I can never remember all this. The oligarchy, governed by the few. So in their sort of totalitarianism tends to be their MO. There's the democracy, of course, where leaders and parties are elected. And there's anarchy. Now what I find really interesting about anarchy is that the connotations of that word suggest chaos, but actually that's not true. Anarchy is just means to be without formal government. So after a time of war, or if you have a breakaway group, those people can create their own ways of organizing themselves. Now that's not a formal government, but it is not necessarily chaos either, because sometimes the people can do it better for themselves, right? So it's quite an interesting conversation you can have with students. And a lot of our texts have those breakaway groups, and they work better. So that's really interesting. And the other thing to think about is the historical events that impact on that political setting. So things like coups, treaties, wars, deaths, so deaths of a leader, especially if there's an assassination, for example, the rise and the impact of the corporate bully, think about some big companies, I better not name them, that seem to be running the show in our world. Dishonourable events, that it may be dishonourable to the leader or the government at the time, or maybe it's something that the country is ashamed of, that they want to rectify or bury their heads in the sand about. There are other things like the ritualistic tests that might be put to leaders, often physical challenges. So these can have an impact on political setting as well. Of course, the effect on the characters, brilliant for dystopian novels and films, as I've already mentioned, is brilliant to study. So well worth delving into political setting. Describing the political setting, again, gives students, those 4 types of governance that I mentioned before. The, what is it? The autocracy, the oligarchy, the democracy, and the anarchy. Give them those words. Give them words like dictatorship. So that autocracy, remember, is one ruler, so it tends to be a dictatorship, and totalitarianism, where people are pushing their own boats, serving their own agendas. So give them words like that, but also give them those words that help describe the mood and other aspects like enslavement. The people are yoked, things like that. So that's really cool, and get students, of course, to add to that. Cultural setting, this is the big kahuna, and it's one that students really struggle to think about if they are not in tune with the special aspects of their culture. So sometimes students need to sort of step out of themselves and imagine that they are looking at how their lives go from an alien point of view. So first I would give them a list of things to consider about their culture, and then of course they can do that for characters of their texts. So some of the things that I get them to look at is obviously language, the family unit, what constitutes the family unit, food and attitudes towards food, as well as types of food and ways of preparing it, ceremonies and celebrations, protocols, so that's your tikanga there, time, its measurement and use. You know, you think about the countries that have siestas, lucky things. Other or higher worlds such as the gods and the stars, how people are valued, so gender, children, elderly, relationship with place, so that's back to that tūranga waiwai again. Meetings, how are they conducted? Symbols and objects, histories and shared experiences, that's your whanaungatanga, and it is as powerful as a blood connection. Ancestral influences, class systems and hierarchies, knowledge and health. So those are all things that students can consider when they're talking about the cultural setting of, well, their own, as well as the cultural setting of a text that you are studying. Again, lots of words to help them describe. As I said before, one of the things about culture that is incredible is that culture survives. Culture survives natural disaster. Culture survives time. 200 years ago, 200 years from now, culture will still, you know, a particular culture will still be much the same. Culture will survive political turmoil, and culture will even survive genocide. And I can't even say that word without cringing. So lots of vocab for them, again, to be made available makes a big difference. Social setting. Now, the irony with social setting is that students find this the hardest to grasp, and I say it's ironic because they're so into their friend groups, like it's all about the social setting for them, you know, like the lunch table where they're all sitting around there and they go there every lunchtime. This is their place. Nobody else is allowed. That's their social setting. So if you can give them examples, then that would be great. Nan's card game up at the community hall. There's a social setting. The rugby club rooms, there's a social setting. So once you give them examples, as I say, it's easy for them to grasp. So they have their own wee ecosystem, our social groups. Within that social setting, there is an acceptable way of dressing. There is an acceptable way of speaking. You think about your colloquialisms and your jargon. In these social settings, there is a set of values that those people live by. There's a certain way of behaving and doing things, so that tikanga. In a social setting, the people there have a like-minded sense of purpose. The kaupapa there is much the same. And of course, as with cultural settings, the people there have that understanding of shared experiences, so that whanaungatanga. Again, if you want to provide your kids with an example, talk to them about, you know, coping with the teenagers at your school, coping with that maths teacher last year, or you know, pimples, relationships with parents, that long school prize giving that we all suffered through last year, things like that. Other things to ask about social setting, you know, what's cool, what's not. What does mana, so that charisma, look like in this setting? What motivates this group? How does this group define wealth? How does this group define beauty? And actually those things also can go back to, that it can be discussed for cultural setting, but sometimes those social settings have a slightly different view. Again, plenty of words to help them describe and discuss. That vocabulary list is really brilliant. If you want some extension work for your students, a little thing that I've been playing around with is to have a Venn diagram with the three people settings, I call them. So that's your political, cultural and social settings. Have a little Venn diagram intersecting the three circles, and get students to think about the values, the needs, the wants for each of those types of setting from your text. And then it's really interesting because in the middle, where everything connects, where they all have the same values, that's your utopian society. Where you have two circles interconnecting, there's harmony there as well. But where a political setting, a cultural setting, a social setting, where they have their own ideas, their own needs, wants, values, those are little itches, right? They are the things that can result in conflict. And I just think doing that would be a really good extension activity for students, because it is kind of hard to grasp, but when you do, it's amazing. Okay, let's look at linking beyond a little bit to help students discuss texts at a whole nother level. Gods and stars. Now, we're really lucky in New Zealand, but I'm sure in any country they have a similar thing. We have our Māori gods and we have our stars and matariki, so they're really neat things to tap into to help us discuss setting and text. So, for example, our Māori God Award, Tū Matauinga, has this God of War, had a hand in the text, you know, and you could discuss a bit of that. How might Tāne Mahuta, the god of the forest, be at work here? Pōhutukawa, one of the stars of Matariki, might be significant in this place where there is death and there is mourning going on. People have been lost. So they are cool ways to help discuss settings as well. Proverbs, of course, here in New Zealand we have whakatauki and whakatauaki, and they can be really neat, often figurative ways to help us discuss setting, especially things like the mood and the values. Those of you who know me know that I totally love Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and in the description below I will link a vlog that I did, a video that I did about how I did a Maslow Mātauranga Māori mashup, and there is a little freebie of the pyramid that I designed linked below as well. So there's we thinking about, you know, what things are really important, like aroha, love, whanaungatanga, whānau, and then we move up the levels and we think more and more about how we gain, you know, that ultimate mana motuaki. So check that one out. So that's another way of describing setting, especially in the way, obviously, that it relates to characters, because it's how those characters interact with the setting and what they get from it, to what extent it nourishes them. Oh, it's pretty deep and it's pretty fun, I have to say. Obviously, the effects of setting on character, as I discussed right from the beginning, setting affects character, and so that means how the character feels, the relationships that they form, the decisions they make, the actions, the reactions, and the knowledge and skills they pick up along the way. So that's, you know, the development. So everything is not driven by the characters, but the setting. Okay, and so within that settings, you know, if you're talking about that political, cultural, and social setting, that brings in the people side of things, but they've got to really understand those aspects of setting to understand the influence on characters. And of course, in turn, characters affect events. So if that hasn't convinced you, that setting is the shiny thing, is the glory element, then I don't know what will. It's actually not characters, it's setting. Check out the blog, linked below, and yeah, enjoy. See ya.